Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hi, friend, and welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast.
Today, we're sharing an episode from the early days of the podcast. It's a deep cut that you may have missed, especially if you've started listening more recently. But even if you've heard it when it was released, you're sure to benefit from this Leadership Rewind episode.
We're sharing these Leadership Rewind episodes because we have found that some of our older episodes haven't reached as many women as our newer ones, yet they're packed with full of value and amazing guidance for you as a leader. So we want to encourage you to listen to this episode and then perhaps check out some of the other episodes that are linked in the show notes.
One quick note, you may hear us or our guest mention resources in this conversation. And since it's from several years ago, some of those resources may not be available at this time.
We hope you enjoy this Leadership Rewind. And if you find it valuable, please share it with a friend. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield, and today I'm talking with Jenni Catron of the Foresight Group. Welcome, Jenni, to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, me too. So, Jenni, I would love for you just to start off by sharing a little bit about yourself, and maybe you can share with us a bit about your own leadership journey.
Sure. Well, I am a Midwest girl, born and raised in Wisconsin, and then went to Nashville, Tennessee to pursue a career in the music business. So that is kind of what set me off on my journey of leadership. And worked for a Christian record company for a number of years, then went into full-time ministry for about 12 years at two different large churches, one in Nashville and then one out on the West Coast. I went to Menlo Park, California, and served on a church there for a couple of years, and then came full circle and moved back home to Wisconsin to be a bit nearer to family. My husband and I have been married almost 20 years, which feels crazy.
Wow, congrats.
But we don't have, thank you. I'm like, how are we even old enough for this? But we did meet in college. I'll preface it with that. But we don't have any children of our own. So we decided that in this stage of life, I launched my company, the Foresight Group, about 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years ago in August. And we just said, you know what, being nearer to family, our nieces and nephews, all of those things was really important to us. And so that took me back to long winters, but beautiful summers.
Yes.
And so that's a little bit of my world. It's
awesome.
My husband and I, and then our extended family is here, and I have some adorable nieces and nephews that I, get every extra moment of my time that I can possibly sneak away and spend time with them. So
that's
a bit of my world.
Awesome. Okay. So I would love to find out, this is something I love hearing from other leaders. When did you realize that you were a leader?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question for me, because I think when I look back at my life, I was always the kid who was given a lot of responsibility early and put into leadership positions very early on. I mean, I led our vacation Bible school at our little small country church when I was like 14. Wow. Led the entire vacation Bible school. So I'm a bit of an overachiever and was often put into positions of leadership like that. When I was 16, I was managing the local ice cream shop. And, I started there when I was 15. And then the following summer, she made me manager. And so I was responsible for the other staff and scheduling and ordering and the whole deal. But I wouldn't have known to call myself a leader. It wasn't a word that was very common in our culture or family dynamics. So I think it was a number of years later, probably when I was first working in the music business, that I actually I can remember a very distinct moment of the idea of leadership hitting me. I was working at the record company in Nashville, and I had kind of a real horrible experience with one of my employees. And it was the first dynamic where I was in a grown-up job and I had staff who reported to me, and I had a lot to prove. I was probably super insecure, and probably all the ugliest parts of my leadership were emerging, and created kind of this perfect storm where I went to my boss and said, you know what, this employee isn't working. They're not cutting it. It's all their fault, and really just started to put a lot of blame on the employee. And my boss looked at me and he said, Jenni, if you want to work with widgets, go work in a factory. But if you want to work with people, you're going to have to learn how to love them and how to lead them.
Mm.
And I think that moment was the first time a leader really said that word lead to me, and really kind of put that mantle of leadership on me. I mean, I had been given all kinds of responsibility and leadership responsibilities in the past, but it was the first time somebody very distinctly said it and said, you've got to learn how to do this. And I can remember immediately going to a Christian bookstore and looking at the leadership section and pulling down a John Maxwell book. And I was early in my career, my salary was peanuts. And I remember like this $20 hardcover John Maxwell book was like a splurge in my budget. And I said, I've got to do it. I've got to read this book. And it was the 21 Most Powerful Minutes in a Leader's Day. It's one of my all-time favorite Maxwell books, probably because I read it at such a pivotal moment. But that's probably the moment that I remember really understanding the responsibility of leadership and going, I've got to get this right, because if I want to lead people, I've got to learn how to love them and then lead them in a way that inspires and brings the best out of them. So it sent me on a crazy trajectory that became my ultimate passion of figuring out, what does it mean to lead well?
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And I've been reading your book, The 4 Dimensions of Extraordinary Leadership, which I love, and I highly recommend it to everybody.
Awesome.
I would love if you could share a little bit. You talk about the 4 different styles of leadership or approaches to leadership. Could you tell us a little bit about those and why you feel it's important for leaders to understand those?
Yeah. And that book was really birthed out of a journey for me to figure out, what does it mean to lead well? I think all of us recognize that there's a lot that is not flashy about leadership when we really get down to it. I think a lot of times we're drawn to leadership because of the position or the influence or the idea of, it's going to be so great. When the reality is, like, true leadership is just challenging behind the scenes work, helping draw out the best of others and guide them and direct them and align that with the mission of the organization. And those two things don't always just synergistically happen. And so in my own growth and development, this was particularly at the church that I was at in Nashville. I was there for 9 years. We went through a lot of growth and transition in that time. And what I began to discover is that there were really 4 key ways, 4 dimensions that I needed to lead from if I wanted to lead in a healthy way to my staff. And I discovered that those were relational leadership was really critical, that the relationships that I was building and how I was intentionally connecting with people were really important, that spiritual leadership was essential. Now that feels obvious because I was in a church, but I will tell you that when you're working in a church, and you probably know this, Esther, when you're working in a church, it doesn't always mean everybody's getting your best spiritual leadership or influence.
Very true.
The strategic part of me that needed to help, drive us forward. And then the visionary side of leadership, of that we have to keep a vision in front of people. So I was really camping out on those 4 things and discovering that in my own leadership development, relational, spiritual, strategic, and visionary leadership needed to flow out of me on a regular basis. So I began writing about that, and it was becoming the book that I was working on. And in the process of writing the book, I was reading back through the scriptures because I really wanted to just look at Jesus' life as a leader. And, I wanted what was coming out of that book to be as healthy a representation of what leadership should look like as possible. So God had really prompted me, go back through and read through the life of Jesus and just like really look at his life through the lens of leadership. And then I was actually starting to skim through Mark chapter 12, where, they're asking Jesus, the controversial questions about taxes and resurrection. They're like trying to throw these curveballs at him. And they say, what's the greatest commandment of all? And he responds with what is known as the great Shema, or the great commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And so I'm like, yeah, I know that stuff. And I'm starting to move on. And I felt the Spirit kind of prompt me, slow down a little bit and look at this. Because if the great commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, and then the second is to love others, and we all distill that to love God, love others. And we're like, okay, if this is the two most essential things that we should do as followers of Christ, how does that apply to leadership? And, I go back all the way to that conversation with one of my bosses in the early days of my music career. And he said, you've got to learn how to love people if you want to lead them. And I'm like, okay, there it is. Love God, love others. Here's the essence of leadership is, in that commandment. But then the aha was, Jesus says, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And I thought, what, we've extracted those and we simplify that verse to love God, love others. But everything I can tell from Jesus, he didn't waste words. And there was usually a purpose behind what he said. And so I began studying the Great Commandment because I was like, okay, wait a minute. I've just assumed I know and understand this. But what I learned is that the essence of that command, and the reason why there's the clarification of loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, is that it's our whole being, that it's everything in us. And as I looked at it more, I was like, okay, wait a minute. I've been wrestling with these 4 concepts of leadership: relational, spiritual, strategic, and visionary. And there's heart, soul, mind, and strength. The heart is the relational side of leadership. The soul is the spiritual side of leadership. The mind is the strategic side of leadership. And the strength, it comes with vision, because without vision, people perish. So vision provides strength when we're talking about it from like a leadership context. And so it became the anchor to say, you know what, every leader needs to lead with these 4 things. It's got to flow out of who we are. If Jesus is saying we've got to love God and love others with our whole being, then when we lead, we need to lead people with our whole being. So it became the framework for leadership for me, and has actually really, I think, made my leadership so much more healthy. Obviously, it's a journey, and I get it wrong a whole lot more than I get it right. But that framework really shapes the way I look at my life as a leader, and it's been extraordinary for me.
I just love that, because as leaders, I think my goal as a Christian leader is to follow the ultimate example of leadership, which is Jesus. And so I love that you have based your whole framework on what he taught and how we can emulate that. Would you say that leaders naturally tend towards one of those 4 areas? And if so, how can we improve the other areas?
That was my finding, is that, and it's part of what, even before I grounded it in the Great Commandment, what I was wrestling with in my personal leadership was that I was really good at the mind dimension, that strategic side, right? Yeah. I mean, it flows out of me. A lot of it is my gifting. A lot of it is my training and experience. But it is like, you give me a plan or you give me a vision and I'm going to build you a plan. Like that is the core of how I'm wired. But what I realized in a lot of my leadership was that I was not giving attention to like the relational side of leadership. But that doesn't work for everybody, right? Like some people actually need to know that I like them and want to be with them, and like don't just need something from them, but I like care about who they are as an individual. That sounds obvious to most people who are relational, but I'm telling you, us less relational types like have more difficulty with this.
Yes.
And then, especially because I was leading in a local church, but I was not a pastor on staff. I was dismissing the spiritual side of leadership, and that I had a spiritual responsibility to invest in my team. And I was kind of negating that because I was like, well, I'm not one of the pastors. And God really convicted me about, what every one of us who are followers of Christ, we have a responsibility to let our spiritual life flow out to those we lead. And I realize most of our listeners are probably folks who are in a place, and maybe not, maybe some of you are in contexts where you're not in a place where you can be overtly Christian. but yet you can let the light of Jesus shine through your integrity and your morality and your character and like the fruit of the Spirit being evident in your life. Like you can model and you can spiritually lead just by emulating the life of Jesus through your life. And so that was big for me. And then realizing the visionary piece is really critical too. So I went way around your question. I'm going to come back to answering it more directly.
That's
so
fine.
Yes, we all will probably be naturally strong in one of them more than the others. But the great learning for me was that Jesus doesn't say, love the Lord your God and love others if you have heart or if you have soul or if you have mind or if you have strength. The implication is that is in us, and it is our whole being, is heart, soul, mind, and strength. So that gave me a great deal of hope to say, actually, I keep telling myself I'm not a relational leader, but Jesus is saying, you have heart, Jenni, like use your heart, like let that show up.
Yes.
And so I think I think we all naturally will be strong in one of the dimensions, and that's an overflow of your gifts and your experience. But you can grow, and I believe you should attempt to grow in the other dimensions so that you can lead from a healthier place.
We'll talk in a little bit about how God has wired us all differently and some tools that we might use to help us understand that. And I think sometimes what happens is when we discover how God has wired us, we tend to then use that as a crutch to say, well, this is just how I am. And we don't keep working on the weaker areas. And so I really appreciate that you've shared we can do it and I'm very similar to you in that the strategic side, the mind side is where I thrive. Like that's where I live. But as you said, we can rely on the strength of Christ to live out those other aspects of leadership too, and become a more well-rounded and effective leader.
For sure. And I've seen that evidence in my own life. And that's why I'm like, okay, it is possible. This stuff, when we submit ourselves to that and are willing to grow, and it doesn't mean I don't use my strategic side. I actually still disproportionately use that because it's part of how God wired me and gifted me.
Yeah.
But now I use it in tandem with the others in a way that I think makes my leadership much healthier.
Right. Yes. Okay. So I know that one of your areas of expertise is in developing healthy cultures and teams, specifically within churches, right? I believe you work with churches specifically. Yeah. So I would love if you could share what can leaders do to develop healthy cultures or teams within their organization?
Yeah, it's so good. And it's a bit of a complex question, but I think even asking the question and being aware of it is the first step.
Right.
And again, I think a lot of times as leaders, we're so fixated on the outcome that we're seeking, so if we have a growth goal in mind, if, mission, so particularly for churches, they're going to have a mission to reach people and, share the gospel. And so they're going to be fixated on that. But part of our responsibility as a leader, a big responsibility for us as a leader, is to actually align a team and bring them with us to the accomplishment of that vision, because we can't do it on our own. And I don't think God designed us to do life on our own. I think we're designed for community. I think there's a refinement that comes when we have to work with others and go with others. And so I think, but a lot of times what happens is that we miss some of the opportunities to develop good culture and healthy teams. And then we get frustrated and dissension kind of grows, or, just these rifts within an organization and within teams happens. And it really sabotages our ability to live out our mission effectively.
Yes.
And so I think when a leader has their eye on culture and has an eye on the effectiveness of their team, it really helps them serve that mission well. So there's a lot of different ways I could go with answering that question. But what I would tell people is, just being aware of the importance and the need for healthy teams, healthy cultures is a good starting point. And then, do you have a sense of the culture that you want to create as a team? So in organizations, we often will have values that are important to the organization. Particularly in churches, there will be values that we espouse as followers of Christ and like values that are important to us as a church. But what are the values for us as a team? How do we want to work together? Another way to look at values is how do we want to behave? How do we treat one another? How do we engage with one another? And defining those things is really important to kind of setting the ground rules for how a team works together. And so if you haven't done that work, that would be one of my first suggestions to you is define your values as a team so that you can kind of create that baseline so everybody's working from the same assumption or the same set of values. And that's a starting point to creating that synergy that creates culture and creates a healthy team. And I actually, on my website, and I know you'll link to this, Esther, but I have a free download that helps walk you through creating those values. So if that's something that piques your interest, and again, this is transferable whether you work in churches or you work in any type of organization, the principles are the same. So you guys can go check that out because it's a free little workbook that kind of walks you through how do you start defining those values that are the building blocks of a healthy team.
The thing that stood out to me there, what you just shared, is that it has to be intentional. Because culture will happen regardless of what you do. But if you want a healthy culture, it has to be intentional, right?
Yeah. A lot of times we, as leaders, will get frustrated because of how our team is behaving. And the first thing we need to do is look at us and go, well, what have I enabled or allowed that has created a culture where the team is acting like this, or they're not, being accountable, or they're not getting stuff done on time, or they're bickering with each other, or, the first thing we have to do as a leader is stop and say, okay, what have I enabled or allowed that has that has made this our culture today? So you have a culture, whether you acknowledge it or not. And the responsibility of the leader is to say, hey, I have authority here. I can help shape this. And really, whatever level of the organization you're at, you can have some influence on the culture because we all influence culture. So even if you're not at the top of the organization, you can really say, well, how can I influence a culture that brings out the values that we really want to be true of our team? So I totally agree with you that it is there, and our job as a leader is to acknowledge it and then to steward it.
Right. Yes. So one of the things you just mentioned is that a lot of times we might be in a position that's not necessarily the head position, kind of like when you were working at the church and you weren't one of the pastors. So you kind of, thought, well, I don't need to take responsibility for the spiritual side. So I think that those that are listening may, as women, a lot of times we find ourselves leading in a setting where there's a majority of men, whether it might be in a church or in a business workplace. And sometimes we may not be in the top role, like we might not be the CEO or whatever. So do you have any advice or recommendations for women specifically to lead effectively in those types of situations? And I know that's a kind of a loaded question, but I'd love to hear from what you have seen works well.
Sure. Yeah. And this has been true of my entire career. I worked in the sales and marketing side of the record company, and it was completely male dominated. And so I had to learn early how to show up, be confident in my gifts and what I brought to the table, and not shrink back from that. And, and then going into ministry, I was the executive director and the executive pastor of both churches that I served in. So I was technically number 2 in the organization. So it was me and then the senior pastor, so, I mean, I had a great deal of influence and responsibility, but it was still a mostly male table that I sat around, like my executive teams at both of those churches were all men except for me. And, but here's what I would say, because I think for a lot of time, I didn't even pay attention that I was the only girl in the room. I was just glad to be in the room. And so I would say my first advice, and this may feel really like trivial, but I don't know. I would say, don't quit thinking about the fact that you're the only woman there. Because I think sometimes we can make it too big of a deal.
Yeah.
And what I found for myself in a lot of my early days of leadership was that I just wasn't really thinking about that. I was just really grateful to be there. And I was going to show up and be present and do my work because I wanted to continue to earn the influence to speak into things. And so I really, and I think this comes from, I have a dad who is super encouraging and always just gave me opportunities. And I think he would have never dreamed the doors that have opened and the opportunities that I have had. I think he's just faithful to, like, pour into me and develop me as a young girl. So I'm grateful for that. And I think that's part of what made me not overly pay attention to the fact that I was the only woman at the table a lot of times. I would say that first, of like, don't overemphasize for yourself the fact that you're the only woman there, because it can start to become a self-fulfilling prophecy that if we're the only woman here, and then we kind of get in that headspace, and so it starts to hold us back.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say to you is, you are there. You have been invited. Your gifts have made a way for you. And so God has opened the door. He has given you this place of influence. It is your job to steward it. So show up with the gifts that God has given you. Know that as a woman, you're going to have different perspectives sometimes, and it is absolutely needed at the table. One of the things that I learned kind of the hard way was that I diminished sometimes the things that were more feminine about me in order to fit in with my male counterparts, when in actuality, I needed to bring some of the feminine side of my leadership, because that was actually going to serve the team better. So knowing that now, obviously we need to be emotionally intelligent. We need to understand how we're impacting the room. And, if we break into tears every other minute, that's going to end up starting to sabotage our influence rather than helping us.
Yes.
But at the same time, when we're passionate, or when we see something that is important, and the mama bear in us kind of comes out, because it's representing the whole. It's representing both the men and the women that we're responsible for influencing and leading. So just bring who God has made you to be, and be smart about how you show up there. I think emotional intelligence and understanding yourself, what's going on with you, and understanding how to read others and engage with others is really important. But don't diminish the part of you that is who God made you to be, the part of you that is a female in a male dominated space. You're going to bring voice and perspective that's really essential for everybody that you lead.
Yes. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And Holly and I actually talked about this a bit on episode 2. So if you missed that episode, go back and listen. But we talked about the need for women to accept their leadership, and that they don't have to lead exactly like men. And so I love that you pointed out that, you don't have to try and hide the feminine side of you as a woman leader. You can actually use that to benefit the entire organization and bring that voice to the table.
Yeah.
So that's so important.
For sure.
Yeah. So one of the things that we love talking about here is how God has wired us differently. And you've mentioned that a couple times about how God has given you specific gifts. And so I would love to hear if there's any particular tools that you have used to learn more about your own wiring, and if you have a favorite that has helped you in being more self-aware.
Yeah. And I'm a total junkie for this stuff. We need to lead ourselves well to lead others better. That's just a mantra of mine.
Yes.
Is self-leadership is so essential to any leadership. And so I think those personality tools, spiritual gifts tests, all of those things are really valuable in understanding how you're made up, how God has wired you, how he's gifted you, and just kind of that evaluation of, what are the things that make me is really, really critical. My favorite among them is Enneagram. And I had a Christian counselor introduce me to the Enneagram probably a decade ago. And I love it because it's an ancient tool. It's been around for forever. So it's probably one of the oldest personality assessments that we know of. And so it has a richness and a depth to it that's really, really powerful. Now, there are a lot of different people who have used Enneagram through the ages. And so I always encourage, hey, read some of the people who have written the Christian perspective on Enneagram, so you can kind of get just a good faith-based perspective on the tool.
Yes.
But what I love about it is that it has this, a lot of personality tests will tell you, hey, this is who you are, focus on your strengths, and don't pay as much attention to your weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And what I love about the Enneagram is to me, it parallels just the whole Christian perspective of that there's this spiritual formation that is ongoing in our life here. That, Philippians 1:6 tells us he's perfecting us until the day of Christ Jesus, until we see Christ face to face. There is an ongoing perfecting work that is happening in us. So we don't arrive this side of heaven. And the Enneagram kind of speaks to that. So it gives you a sense of, hey, here's your personality type. Here are the things that are kind of natural for you. So I mentioned earlier, I'm an achiever. I'm an Enneagram 3. I am the achieve, make it happen, move things forward, conquer, competitive, like all of those things are part of me. Well, you hear it, right? It oozes out of me. There are some really beautiful things about that, but there's also a dark side to it, right? In that I bulldoze people in that process. I can sacrifice relationships, as I mentioned earlier, because of that drivenness in me can sometimes cause relational casualties. And so that's the thing I love about the Enneagram, is it shows us the image of God we reflect, and that as a 3, as the achiever, I also show the efficiency of God, and that God is good, and that plans and systems and those things are good and they're healthy. But I also, there's a sin side of this too. And I need to be aware of that, and I need to seek to continue to grow in that. So the reason why I love the Enneagram so much is it gives room for growth and development and doesn't just completely box you in. So that was a really long answer to which one I use and why, but there you go.
No, that's awesome. And I am also a fan of the Enneagram, and definitely we'll be talking about that on this podcast quite a bit, because like you said, it is such a powerful tool, and it does have the side where you're continually growing and learning and growing closer to how God actually designed us to be, but also identifying how you're different from other people and embracing that instead of trying to just be like someone else. I'm curious to know, has there ever been a time in your life where you have been frustrated with an aspect of your personality or part of how you are wired? And then how have you learned to embrace that or work through that and embrace your identity in who God has designed you to be?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it's actually pretty uh, uh, significant to me, because I did go through, and I think I've probably gone through different iterations of this over the years, but there was one particular season where that drivenness, like make things happen part of me that had been celebrated for so long, kind of hit a brick wall. And it was when I was working in the church, and actually it was shortly after I went from working in the music business to working in the church full time. And so everything that had been praised and celebrated in the corporate structure that I was in, that driven, like make things happen, push it forward, kind of part of me was really celebrated and promoted inside the marketplace. And when I went into the church, at first it was kind of, it was received pretty well, but pretty quickly it became a very negative thing in the culture, and that people were very, very put off by it. The abrasiveness of that needed some massaging, in my life. But I shut down as a result of it, in that I began to think that part of me was just all bad and all wrong, and I was in a culture around a lot of very relational, spiritual leaders who were very opposite from me. And the reason why I came onto the church staff was because I was bringing a set of gifts that the team really needed, but I was the outlier. Yeah. And after a few bumps and bruises and, people not happy with me, I began to shut down and thought, oh, I'm supposed to be like all of them, and I'm not like them. And I just felt like a complete failure. And so I really retreated. I really shut down. And I actually had a board member at that time say to me, Jen, you came in, all on fire, gung ho to do the thing that we asked you to come and do. And you hit a few bumps and bruises along the way, and you've completely swung to the other end of the spectrum, and you're not at all who we need you to be. And so we need you, we don't want you to lose that part of you that we loved and we brought you here for. But now we want it to come with some of the refinement. But that was really hard. I mean, Esther, I really did go through a season of, is this drivenness, is this, this ambitious part of me all bad?
Mm-hmm.
And so for a while, I really just shied away from it. And I will tell you, from time to time, I will get afraid of my ambition and
Mm-hmm.
I will start to shrink from it. And I have some good people in my life who now know how to call it out of me, because I'm so afraid of doing it wrong and like my ambition going into overdrive and being detrimental, that I now will shrink from it instead of like really living into it. So I really live in that tension these days of going, okay, wait a minute, that ambition, that drive, that achiever in me is not all bad. I
Right.
just have to find the part of it that God is forming and reforming, and not be afraid of it, even though I'm not going to get it right all the time. But to completely shut it down is to not steward that gift that God has given me.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a powerful example. And I can 100% relate with that feeling of uh,
Hmm.
an aspect of your personality that God has actually created you to be driven, right? To be someone who pushes
Sure.
things forward. But like you said, in certain settings, sometimes that is not appreciated and or
Yeah.
recognized. And
Yeah.
so it can be really hard to continue to use that gift that God has given and know that it's actually
Mhm.
there for a reason. So I appreciate you sharing that. So one of the things that I really feel passionate about is encouraging women to embrace their gifts and lead with confidence. And we've talked about that some here. So can you share what is one of your gifts or something that you're really good at, and how do you use that gift?
Mm. So I think that one of the things I'm really good at helping leaders put feet to vision. That's kind of like the little
Mm,
summary phrase that I've given it over time, is that when a leader or an organization has a big goal that they want to accomplish, I really am able to see all of what needs to happen to bring that vision to fruition. So whether it's organizing a team of individuals to make it happen, who needs to do what, kind of orchestrating all of that, if we need to build out the strategic plan, all of those things, I like that is it just comes very naturally to me. So as with the Foresight Group, that's part of what we do in our consulting, is that we help organizations create strategic plans, or sometimes that's very specific to a goal, and or we'll work with organizations on helping them get their team more aligned and working more healthy together.
mm,
So if the goal is a healthier team that's actually thriving and doing good work together, then I have a real heart and passion for the dynamics of team, and whether how we can best utilize the different gifts and strengths of each team member, and then using those to accomplish the mission. So that's the essence of it, is I can put feet to vision. Like, I can figure out how to get you from A to Z. Like, that is just what I do.
yeah, that's
My
awesome.
family loves to use that for family vacation, right? They'll all decide, okay, here's where we want to go. And then it's like, okay, Jenny, so you tell us what we need to do to get there,
Yeah,
and I love it. Like, I will build plans and spreadsheets, and like everybody's like, okay, yay, we know exactly what we're doing.
there
So
you go.
yeah. So it just oozes out of me in every dimension of life.
Yeah, yeah. And I love how you have discovered that that's one of your best gifts. And then you built your business around that, right? Like that, I mean, that's the purpose of your business, is to
Yeah.
use your gift to benefit other people. And I think that
Yeah,
sometimes
for sure.
sometimes we know what our gift is, or we're trying to figure out what our gift is, and it can take time. I don't know if it took you, like, do you know how long it took you to figure out that that was kind of one of your biggest contributions to this world, is being able to
Mm.
put feet to vision?
It really became clear when I moved from the music business to ministry. And I'll give you the short story of this, but basically, since I was like 13 years old, I wanted to work at a record company,
Mm,
and I specifically wanted to work for Forefront Records, and that's exactly where I went to work. So I mean, again, if I
yes.
have a vision, I'm going to build a plan and I'm going to make it happen. So that was evident really young. So I went to work at my dream job. I
Yeah.
went to college, and then I got an internship at that record company, and that turned into a job. And so I was living my dream job when the church that my husband and I were a part of asked me to consider coming on staff.
Mm,
And it was one of those deals where at first I thought, that's crazy. I'll never leave the music business. I love my work. I was 28 and I was a seat away from the executive suite. So, I mean, I was like, my career trajectory was like going exactly as planned, according to my plan. And so when my pastor asked me to consider coming on staff, I thought, this is ludicrous. Like, what would I do at a church? I grew up in small country churches where if the pastor got paid, like that was a success, so we didn't have a lot of other paid staff. And I was like, I don't know what I would do here, And so it took about 6 months of conversation, but the issue was I couldn't shake it. Like, I knew God was prompting me to consider it. And I was fighting him all the way because I was like, I want to keep doing what I'm doing. And it was clear that God was kind of prompting me to look at this. And so that journey of 6 months of conversations and prayer and time with mentors and so forth really helped. I can remember the moment where God kind of unlocked that and said, hey, it's not that I've called you to work at the music business. Like, the skills that you've used here in helping like artists accomplish their vision, and you aligning a team of record company executives to make sure that the vision that the artist has for their music actually happens. Like, I need you to do that for the local church. I need you to take all that skill of helping, take a vision and build it into a plan that enables records to be sold, and a whole team of marketing and sales and all of that working together to accomplish that vision. I need you to take that skill set of putting feet to vision and use it inside the local church. And that was the aha moment for me. And it was really critical because I think, as a little kid, and we all do this, right? We say, I want to be this when I grow up. And for me, that was, I wanted to work at a record company.
Yeah.
And I was doing it. So I had no other paradigm for, what I was really gifted at. I was just doing the thing that I said I wanted to do. And that journey of God kind of redirecting me forced me to really look at what's the essence of who God has created me to be, and how does that transfer regardless of what assignment he gives me.
Right.
And I've had to come back to that and other times when he's redirected and I've had to do new things and go, okay, wait a minute. No, it wasn't about this role. My identity is not that role.
Right.
Here is the gift set God has given me. And when he moves me, I can use that in a different context and still do work that is honoring him because I'm using the gifts that he's given me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So much good stuff there. So much good stuff. I'm curious to know, when you've transitioned from the music business into the church, and then from one church to another, and then back to Wisconsin. So in those transitions, did you find for you and your husband that there was any difficulty or tension in those changes? And were they primarily driven by your career path, or was he being prompted to move somewhere else as well?
It's actually a really interesting dynamic because my career has always been the leading career, not because I set out for it to be that way, but it's just kind of the way. And my husband is super accomplished. He has a great career himself. But my career has always triggered every one of our moves, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And that come with some weight and some pressure in that now we have always made those decisions together. So anytime I felt like God was shifting or changing something, when I got the offer to take the job in California, I called my husband because I was going to a breakfast meeting that I thought was just a networking meeting, and it turned out to be a job offer.
Oh,
so
my
I was
goodness.
kind of taken aback by it. And yeah, it was one of those,
surprise.
this was not what I was expecting. Nor did I really ever think about moving to California for, work, because we had been in Nashville 20 years. Like, we were totally content and happy there. And so I called my husband. I said, you're not going to believe this. This breakfast turned into a job offer. And he said, well, I'm not moving to California. And I said, well, good, me either. And just, hung up the phone and didn't think anything of it. And then, a couple days, week, I don't know, went by, and the pastor at the church there kind of reached out a couple times and was really asking us to consider at least making a visit. And I didn't even want to entertain it, but my husband was the one that said, well, Jen, it's not going to hurt for us to go out there and learn more. And so what I will say is, while my career has always been the one that has moved us and been the career in our relationship, it has always been in tandem. And that I remember when we were in California for one of the visits and we were driving down, I mean, I remember the very spot on the street we were driving down, and we were considering the job. And my husband said to me, Jen, I think you're called to this. And I was like, crap, because yeah, I mean, I was like, we had just moved into a new house in Nashville. Like I was not ready to move. And he was the one who actually said, I think you're called to this.
Wow.
And it meant for him giving up his career and having to start over in California, which was not easy, and actually really put him through a season of just transition that was really hard for me to watch, because I knew that my career caused the disruption in his life.
Right.
And so it again, long answer to your question, but yeah, mine has always triggered our moves up till this point. I'd be happy for his to take over at this juncture, but we have always done it in unity, and that's been really important to us. That whenever we have moved, it has been okay, are we both in? Is this what we feel called to? And we go together. And there were numerous times where the California move it was not a comfortable move for me. It was a very difficult season for me. And there were times that I would apologize to my husband for moving us out there and like putting him through all of his career changes. And numerous times he would stop me and he would say, Jen, we made this decision together. You did not make this decision. This was us making a decision together. And so we're in it together. So I'm really, really like fortunate and blessed to who like, lets me lead and lets me be all of who I am, but also like we're a team.
Yeah.
We're in it together. And he supports me in a really beautiful way.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like there's probably some women listening that can relate. And even just the personality dynamics in my marriage, it hasn't been my career that has led anything, but my personality tends to be stronger than my husband's, and my drive is stronger. And so there are times that there's that tension there. But like you said, if you can get on the same page and make decisions together, then that relieves a lot of the pressure of feeling like you've been the one to make a huge change in your family or in your life. So super important.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Can you tell me, what does leading with confidence look like for you?
I think it's an understanding of your gifts and where God has you, and just intentionally showing up to that. I think sometimes for me, I always want to get way ahead of where I am. That's a little bit of my wiring. Is at Enneagram 3, we like to work on what's ahead of us rather than being present to what's in front of us.
Yep.
And I'm sure that's not just an Enneagram 3 thing, but it is distinct to the 3. And so I think confidence comes from being present and aware of where God has me, the circle of influence I'm in, and using the gifts that He's given me to serve this circle of influence well right now. And I think when I'm there's a confidence that comes. I often will use the phrase humble confidence, because it helps me kind of right size my confidence. So my confidence isn't tipping to a place of arrogance, but it's humbly recognizing that God has given me gifts and given me opportunities, and I get to confidently step into those because He's opened those doors and equipped me in this way. So I do that with a humility of, wow, God gives me opportunities and chooses to use and work with me, and confidence that, He has put me here and He will use those gifts to serve who He's called me to serve. So I use humble confidence because it helps me right size it in my mind.
Yeah.
Other people, that might not be as important, but I can tip to arrogance too quickly if I'm not careful. So that's what's important for me, is that I really see it as this humble confidence of humility that, wow, God chooses to use me, but confidence in that God does choose to use me, and He has gifted me for it.
Awesome. That's really a good reminder to have that centering of where those gifts have come from when we're walking in confidence. So I have found that habits and routines are one of the most important things for leaders as we are managing multiple roles and responsibilities. So can you share with us if you have any particular habits or routines that you use to help you be effective as a leader?
So good. I'm a creature of habit. So yes, and yes, and yes. Um, Although I have a very erratic schedule because sometimes I'm traveling, sometimes I'm at home. Like, my schedule looks different almost every day. I am up super early. I typically exercise. I eat breakfast. I do quiet time. I read. Like I have done like 4 hours of time before most people's work days have started. And that's just essential for me. Like
Mhm.
I'm an introvert. And so I need really good intentional quiet time before I jump into a very extroverted job.
Yeah.
So it sounds outrageous. It's just what my spouse and affords, but it's also a sacrifice that I make. Like I truly am like up super early and give time to those things. In that is exercise is important. Eating well is important and fueling my body first thing. So I'm sharp, my mind is sharp. And then reading both scripture and then, so typically I'm reading scripture and other like devotional type materials for a bit and my prayer time. And then I follow that with some intentional reading for leadership or business or, personal growth stuff. So
Okay.
that little collection of things is my routine every morning.
Yeah. I love it. That sounds very similar to what I do, although I'm still working on the getting up early. It's a work in progress for me because I'm a night owl
It's
naturally.
it's oh yeah. See, and I'm not. So it's like I push myself even earlier than would be natural for me. But
Mhm.
I am a morning person,
Oh,
so that
that's good.
comes a lot easier. When yours might have to be different because you
Yeah.
are more of a night owl.
Yeah.
It's like does it happen late at night? And
Yeah.
it's that's where you can find your time. I think
Yeah.
that's the important thing is all of us recognizing, where do I get my best energy and how do I fuel that, so
There's not a magic formula, but you do need to find what works for you.
totally. Yeah.
So you mentioned reading, and I always say leaders are learners, and so I always love to ask, what have you been learning or reading or listening to lately that maybe would be something that would benefit someone listening that you think could improve their leadership?
So such a good question. So I'm reading a lot on emotional intelligence right now
Mhm.
because my next book is going to have a strong thread of the importance of emotional intelligence as leaders. I'm reading a zillion books on it, so I'm trying to think of a good resource for you. But a great starting point on emotional intelligence is Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradberry. It's a great, like, quick, like, understanding of what emotional intelligence is and then how you rank on the 4 categories of emotional intelligence. It's a little like it's good self-awareness kind of tool, but it's also a little vulnerable. That's one of the things I've been in recently that would be hopefully helpful to you all.
Okay. Perfect. I will definitely put the links to that and everything else that we've talked about in the show notes for you who are listening. So, Jenni, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. And I know that I've gotten so much out of this conversation. So, I would love for you to share what's the best way for people to connect with you. And if there's anything, I know you mentioned one resource on your website, but if there's anything else that you'd like to share that you have going on that might benefit those who are listening, feel free to share that with us.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, the best way to connect with me, I'm Jenni Catron on all the social media accounts. So it's JenniCatron. So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook that way. And our website for the Foresight group is getforesight.com. It's the word get, the number 4, the word site.com. And I referenced the values workbook that's there, but there are several other like free workbooks and tools that one is on 7 steps for determining your passion. So if some of just even understanding what's my purpose, can I distill my gifts into a succinct statement like I have of I put feet to vision. And then I would say that we have a women's leadership intensive coming. It's a cohort of 20 women in leadership, and it's just a fantastic experience. Myself and my friend Allie Worthington are co-hosting that. You can get the details at the website for that as well. But it's just a great environment. If you, as a woman, you're eager to continue to grow in your leadership, it's kind of a just a leadership accelerator to help you in your leadership development with a small, safe group of amazing women, like-minded women. So I'd love for y'all to check that out too.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks again, Jenni, for your time and for sharing with us today. And I will talk to you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Esther. This was fun. And let me know how I can help promote and support.
Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving us a rating and review in your podcast app? This helps more women just like you find the podcast. And it also helps them to know whether the podcast would be a good fit for them. Just go to the show in your podcast app, then scroll down until you see the option for ratings and reviews. From there, you can tap to rate and write a review. It means the world to us when you take a couple minutes to do this, and thank you so much to everyone who has left a review. Now, don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence.